Welcome along to a very special edition of Ask GCN Anything. In line with our Cobbled Classics theme running up to Paris-Roubaix, we thought we'd do a special edition of this show. You've been sending in your questions all about the cobbles, and we're going to crack straight on with them now. Starting with this one from Gary Skinner. How hard is it? I'm doing Flanders for the first time. Are those cobbles and climbs as brutal as they look?
That is a very good question. And in a word, yes, they are. But without much to scare you even more, I'm going to say I actually found them harder than they looked, because I must confess that when I used to watch Tour of Flanders and similar races on TV, I didn't think that the cobbles looked that bad. The riders were on effectively normal road bikes and they were going so fast. And then I got the shock of my life when I actually first rode them, because they're brutal. But the good news is that actually you can take much of the sting out of the Flandrian cobbles anyway with just running bigger tyres. If you can squeeze 28mm tyres into your road bike, you'll float right over them.
Yeah, it does make a huge difference. As Si alluded to, professional sportsmen and women, they just make things look far easier than they actually are. So be prepared for it to be hard before you head over there. As you will probably well know, Matt and I were over in Flanders and indeed Roubaix last week, and it did bring home once again just how hard the cobbles are. But also what I noticed going from climb to climb is the disparity between how good or bad the cobbles are. So on the Paterberg, for instance, which is only 400 meters long, they're very evenly spaced, well set, and they're all quite even in terms of their shape as well. Whereas on the Koppenberg, they're all different sizes, there's massive gaps between them, it's super steep, you can get wet and slippery as well. So even between the cobbled climbs, there is quite a difference.
For my money, Eau de Quermont was the roughest, and there's one particular cobble that every time I rode up it, I seemed to hit, and it's an absolute giant. So watch out for that one if you ride the Eau de Quermont. There's a giant cobble. There's
also a big hole you need to watch out for. You look at this picture from Matt Stevens, our colleague on Twitter. We found that they were repairing the Quaremont, but hopefully they'll have repaired it completely before you head out there.
A big bunny hop that you need to do, isn't it?
Yeah, just look into your equipment. As Si says, biggest tyres that you can put on your frame set is the best thing to do. There are a host of other things that you can also look at on your bike, and if you'd like to watch this next video, we've got all our tips in one place there.
The most important equipment choice when riding the cobbles are tyres. They provide your contact point with the road, cushioning and grip.
Yeah, basically, the bigger the tyre that you can fit in your bike, the better. Okay, then we've got another equipment-themed question now. This question sent in by Chris Naudet. How bad is doing something like the cobbles on a carbon frame? I guess if I was a sponsored cyclist, I wouldn't give it two thoughts, but being a working-class citizen and being fortunate enough to own a superbike, I'm not so sure. Good question that, Dan.
Yeah, short answer to that particular question, once again, is yes, it's absolutely fine to use your top-end superbike with a carbon frame. I mean, the proof's in the pudding with the pro riders. Admittedly, they get given their bikes for free and replaced for free if they crash them, but they're absolutely fine to go over all of the cobbled stretches, and they put them through their paces more than most people, I think you will agree.
Yeah, also, interesting point actually, the whole debate around frame materials. We tried to address this in a few videos in the past, and one of the enduring myths of carbon is that it is somehow fragile. And actually, any frame material can be fragile. The difference between them comes down purely to the engineering. So you could make a bomb-proof carbon frame, you can make an incredibly weak carbon frame, but equally you can make an incredibly weak steel frame or an incredibly weak strong frame. So actually, it doesn't really matter what material your bike is made from, it's more who's designed it and made it in the first place. So I don't know what super bike you have, but like Dan said, I'm sure it's going to be absolutely fine.
Yeah, and all good cycling manufacturers now have got to the point where they can make these light frames because they're strong in the direction they need to be and not where they're not. But what that does mean is that if you do crash a top-end carbon frame and the bars hit the top tube, because it's not strong when you pincer it like that, you can then crack it. So I guess the answer to your question as to whether you want to use your superbike is how confident you are of staying rubber side down.
Yeah, there is actually another important point here though, and I always think it's good to be able to ride equipment that you actually feel confident in really pushing through its paces. So, you know, having an amazing bike is great, but if you are worried about trashing it, then you're not going to be able to enjoy the experience of riding cobbles quite as much perhaps as if you're on a bike that you were in a better place to afford to replace. So that is worth bearing in mind actually. You might simply enjoy riding cobbles more if you're on something that you perhaps were not quite so invested in, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, clear as mud.
Sorry.
Right, next up from Simon Rasmussen. How important is rider weight on these routes? Is it deciding or is it race deciding? No is the answer to that one. In fact, it's been a long time since a very lightweight rider has won something like the Tour of Flanders. I think the last guy was probably Michele Bartoli, who's kind of mid 60 kilograms roughly. Vincenzo Nibali, incidentally, who's just won Milan Sanremo and has won all 3 of the Grand Tours, is doing the Tour of Flanders this year, so it'll be very interesting to see how he gets on. But in general, whereas in the Grand Tours on the climbs, it's all about power to weight ratio over quite a long period of time, at the Cobbled Classics, it's kind of about power to weight ratio, but over a very short period of time. So none of the climbs really are longer than about 2 minutes in duration. And it generally is the big brutes, relatively speaking, as cyclists, who can really put the power down 600, 700, 800 watts for a minute or two, that do best at this type of race.
Presumably as well, it comes down to resilience. So it's the repeated efforts, and it's also about fighting for position, which I guess you're the one who's raced it down, not I, but you know, that often comes on the flatter roads where wind plays a part as well. So it is going to favour a bigger, stronger rider, isn't it, I guess?
Yeah, the early stages of the Tour of Flanders, for example, as Si says, are much more about getting into position before the climb than they are about going super hard on the climb itself. So if you manage to get yourself into the top 20, you can actually ride up them reasonably easily. And it's when the group whittles down later, the big attacks come on the climbs, and that was where I was always shot off the back.
I was waiting for that bit.
Next up, we have a question from Jakob Mikael Espersen. What is more effective in terms of speed, to stay on the cobbles or to ride the dirt or the gutter beside them?
Well, it depends, I guess, on the sector you're talking about, but in most cases, it's probably quicker to ride on the dirt beside it, isn't it? I mean, the dirt is generally smooth, and as long as it's dry, which it has been for a long time now, every Classics season, hasn't it? For the last, are we up to like over 10 years now of dry Classics races? More than that, in fact, 13 years or something. So yeah, the dirt beside it is better, but you have to watch out. Like Peter Sagan found out to his cost last year, if you ride too close to the edge, you may end up getting some fan's jacket wrapped around handlebars, and then your race is over.
Yeah, not something you need to worry about as a cyclo-tourist, but this is actually something we're going to talk about on a video which will be released over the next 10 days or so, how to ride on the cobblestones. In it, I talk about the fact that you can definitely ride on the dirt or the gutter because it's smoother and therefore faster, but the problem can come in trying to get back onto the cobblestones themselves, because there's often a lip and the dirt might get a bit deeper on the side of the road. And in order to illustrate that, Matt and myself both ride on the gutter.
And Matt fell off, did he?
Yeah, so we should see that video now.
Poor old Matt. That's another one to add to the archive, isn't it?
It was such a great point for him to do that though, because we were just in the middle of explaining that it can be quite hard to get back onto the cobble. So
well, he took one for the team, I guess, didn't he?
He did, yeah.
Right, anyway, let's move on, shall we? We've got this question from Michael Burke. Another equipment one, actually. How well do carbon fibre wheels cope with the cobbles compared to aluminium ones?
That's an interesting question, because for a long time they definitely couldn't cope with the cobbles. So you would always see teams up until probably 2010 rolling out their Cobbled Classic specialist wheels, which were box section rims of a whole host of spokes, normally 36. So in the 90s and into the early year 2000s, most teams would have those Ambrosio Nemesis wheels. I'm not sure if you remember them.
Yeah, I remember those.
Gold insert over the valve hole, and 36 spokes, and tied and soldered spokes as well to make them even stronger.
To be fair, they almost always stood out because they had those green tinged Vittoria pavé tyres as well. Like, you could spot them a mile off, couldn't you? It was like, it was the Classics combo.
Yeah,
great.
They were bulletproof, and actually they make great training wheels to this day, don't they? Because they just never break.
But there's a load sloshing around on eBay.
Probably are. Anyway, they were perfect for the Cobbled Classics, and of course no team was at any disadvantage because they were all on fairly standard box section rims.
Yeah, but the important point here is that carbon technology moved on, didn't it? And you mentioned 2010 as a reference point. 2010 was indeed the year. So Zip, being used by Fabian Cancellara, ended up winning Paris-Roubaix that year, and I don't think that the race has been won on anything other than carbon wheels since that point. So I guess carbon manufacture got to a point, and particularly carbon, like the resin used in the manufacture, became so hard that actually they were able to withstand the pounding from the cobbles. And if you're going to get a flat and then end up riding your wheel on the cobbles anyway, it's kind of irrelevant whether your wheel stands up or not, because you're going to get a new one from your team car or your teammate.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly carbon technology has moved on. You forget, don't you? But only 10 years ago, the bikes looked very different just because they were all on those super shallow rims. But even in the last couple of years, it's moved on even further because Matt Hayman, of course, in that famous victory where he was training on Zwift for Paris-Roubaix, went on to win it. Not only did he win it, but he did so on an aero bike. Scott Aerofoil, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. You know, it begs a question, doesn't it, about during those transition years when particularly Cancellara was running Zip 303s and Boonen was still running the box sections. How much of an advantage did Cancellara have in running those wheels?
Very true, yeah.
If I was going to guess, right, I'd say significant advantage on the tarmac, but I wonder, and we should maybe do some science one day, Dan. Actually,
full stop, yeah.
Yeah, we should maybe do some science.
We can do a GCN experiment, so yeah.
No, but actually testing whether or not the aluminium rims, because they're a little bit more forgiving, they've got a bit more flex than the carbon ones, whether actually they are still to this day faster on the cobbled sections, but then you just have that handicap on the other bits.
Anyway, it's time now for our last question for this special episode of Ask GCN Anything. Don't forget, if you've got questions on any other subject, you can go on to social media and use the hashtag TalkBack, and we potentially will answer your question next week. Anyway, the last one is from David Coolshaw. Why don't they do it on mountain bikes? Or does it have to be ridden on a road bike? Just think of the advantage that mountain bikers would have.
Oh, good question. One we asked ourselves, in fact, last year. The first part, actually, is that yes, it does have to be ridden on a road bike. The UCI, who's the governing body that oversees professional cycling, stipulate that road races have to be ridden on road bikes, and there's a gazillion different regulations that mean that the bikes look the way they do. But actually, is a mountain bike faster on the cobbles? Yes, it is, quite significantly. So Matt and I put a road bike, a cross bike and a mountain bike to the test on one of the gnarliest sectors of cobbles at Paris-Roubaix, and we were significantly faster on the mountain bike. Weirdly, it felt slower, it felt easy, we weren't getting bounced around, but boy was it fast.
One thing that you do need to take into consideration here with Paris-Roubaix is that whilst there are around 55 kilometres of cobbled stretches, which is a lot, the whole race is 260 kilometres plus, so it's actually still a fairly small percentage of around 20%. And they need to think about their aerodynamics and their rolling resistance on the roads between the cobbles almost as much as they need to think about their comfort and speed over the cobbles. If you're going to choose yourself to go over and do the Paris-Roubaix Sportive, that would be quite a tough one, I think, because as Si said, it's far more comfortable and faster on the cobbles on a mountain bike with bigger wheels. Depends how much you want to kind of get to the reality of what the riders face in the race, whether you want to cruise along the Paris-Roubaix Sportive and be as comfortable as possible, or if you want to experience something like the races do.
There's a simple answer, Dan. The gravel bike.
Yeah, something
surely
between.
You got your drop handlebars, you can have an aggressive position, but you have wider tyres, you cruise along. There you go.
Yeah. Problem solved.
But going back to that point actually about only 54 Ks on cobbles, the rest on road. We're seeing now people racing and indeed winning, courtesy of Matt Hayman, who you mentioned a moment ago, on aero road bikes. And there is a trend, isn't there? Peter Sagan, I think, started it by actually starting the race on his aero road bike, doing the first 100 Ks of tarmac, then swapping onto his more cobble-specific bike to then carry on and do the last 160K, which, I don't know, I would never have had the guts to actually jump off a bike, swap onto another one just before a gnarly section of cobbles, you know. But he's Peter Sagan, he can do what he likes.
It makes sense to do that, doesn't it? Purely because the first 100Ks, like you said, there aren't any cobbles, and then you can gauge the tyre pressure perfectly, because as things stand, they gauge the pressure that they need for the cobbles, and then they reverse back to what it's going to be at the start, because of course with the tubular tyres, they've got latex inner tubes, which gradually let air out. So if you want to have, say, 4.5 bar for the cobbles, you probably need to start with 5.2, and there's quite an equation to that. So it's an interesting subject, but as Si points out, you never know when the race is going to be on and when it's not, so it's quite a risk to change over to a cobbled bike when the race might be full gas.
But if it is Peter Sagan that's stuck on his specialised Venge Vias, I fancy him riding through Arenberg in, you know, pretty good shape really on that thing.
Of everyone, he'd probably get away with it, wouldn't he?
Doing a wheelie whilst he does it, you know, one-footed, one-handed.
Yeah.
He can do what he likes, can't he?
Right, well that's it for this special edition of Ask GCN Anything. We are very excited about the Cobbled Classics this year, it has to be said, hence why we're doing a special Cobbled Classics fortnight. In fact, it's more than a fortnight, isn't it? Plenty more videos to come as we go through Ghent-Wevelgem, E3 Prize, the Tour of Flanders and ultimately Paris-Roubaix, but the first video is already out, and that is Matt explaining exactly what the Cobbled Classics are all about. You can find that just down here.